Chapter 37. The front door swung open and the gunfire across the parking lot temporarily stopped. We weren't quite sure which bullets belonged to the hunters and which belonged to Nico and Tony. The dim light on the horizon gave me the tiniest glimmer of hope. A new day was coming, if we could just push through this last stretch of night. A knife flipped across the open space, followed by a concussive shotgun blast. The slug from the shotgun actually arrived first, but I stopped both and turned them into powder. "Looks like the hunters are this way," I said to Tiffany, and we turned to the parked cars and the hunters hiding behind them. The power flowed through my veins like I had never felt before, and then Tiffany laid her hand on my shoulder. I thought lightning would erupt from my fingertips. "Daniel said it helped to have more people connected," Tiffany said in my ear. "He had me hold his hand, stump, when we were removing the rust from the wall." "Oh yes, that'll do." I raised my hands forward and the first car flipped high into the air. The hunters, crouching behind it, were frozen in shock. The car came back down and I caught it just before it crushed them. One hunter fired at me and I swiped the bullets aside and dropped the car. Oops. We moved forward to the next car and again I flipped it high into the air, catching it a few feet above them. This time they froze and put their hands in the air. Their guns leapt out of the dirt and into the hands of Tony, who had come up next to me. Nico was nowhere to be seen. The remaining hunters ran out from behind their cars in an effort to run back to the building for fresh cover. I launched the car in their path, blocking them. The confusion was plain on their faces as I pulled the guns out of their hands. "Steve, bring them now!" I yelled to the building. Seconds later, a large but nimble security guard ran out with 5 kids in tow and one in his arms. "Find a car and get out of here!" He stood motionless, with a key in his hand, pointing at an upside-down, powder blue Toyota Prius that must have been his. Oh, sorry, Steve. It wouldn't have mattered anyway because a row of headlights came down the lone driveway. At least 5 new cars full of hunters arrived and assembled in front of us. The original hunters took positions behind us under the cover of the building. Tiffany, Tony, Steve, and the kids were all exposed. Oh yeah, me too. As if matters couldn't get worse, a spotlight hit us from above as the sound of rotors chopped the night sky. A helicopter swooped around us and came to a hover. The side door slid open and 2 people stood in the cargo hold. One with long blonde hair, the other was manning a .50 caliber machine gun. The loudspeaker from the chopper came to life. "You brought this upon yourself, Finn. You will now all restart. Pity." Several seconds passed and she added, "Kill them all." The dim light from the coming sunrise was nothing compared to the instant eruption of light from 20 guns opening fire simultaneously. I slowed time to a near crawl and measured the speed of the bullets coming from all directions. The heavy .50 caliber bullets were more difficult to stop because of their mass and momentum, but pushing them aside could ricochet badly. I decided to stop them as best I could. I had one hand directly above me, freezing the bullets streaming down from the chopper. With the other hand, I swept the bullets aside from the other fallen positioned in front of us. My attention pulled to the rear as the original hunters rearmed. "Daniel," I screamed, "keep our 6 clear!" He replied, but I couldn't hear over the constant gunfire. The helicopter was moving fast and shooting in strafing runs. They were coordinated in that they would concentrate their fire during the strafing run, then reload and reorganize. The confusion was staggering as I swept the barrage in front of us and then diverted to stop the heavy rounds coming from the chopper. Daniel was yelling at the hunters, taunting them. Attaboy. I couldn't find Steve. Perhaps he had found cover. Tony had rolled back to the wing to engage the hunters in our flank. He was sweeping the bullets directly up into the air in an effort to affect the helicopter, possibly damage a rotor. Good idea, Tony, so I decided to try as well. Then I noticed the chopper swing back around to open fire on Daniel and the kids. They were too far away to stop the bullets, so I pushed them away, the bullets crashing into the cement building, sending fragments everywhere. Another round of shots from the main group, and I pushed them upward toward the chopper. No effect. For the first time in this crazy evening, I felt really tired. And then Tony screamed in pain. He was just 15 feet from me, a knife sticking out of his leg. His hands were still straight out, blocking bullets that were coming in a near continuous stream. For the first time, I worried that there was no surviving this. I screamed, "Daniel, come this way! Tiffany, we are moving to Tony!" I continued to block the majority of the bullets, now sweeping them aside instead of stopping them. As soon as Daniel moved close enough with the kids, I threw my hands out, forming a bubble shield. The bullets rained down as I compressed the thickness of the protective layer. The heavy .50 caliber bullets from the chopper penetrated deep into the shield, while the small arms bullets bounced off it like they were throwing pebbles at an armored car. The large rounds kept coming, penetrating deep into the shield. Slowly, the bubble shrank in size in an effort to strengthen the shell. "What should we do, Finn?" screamed Daniel. He was afraid. Several of the kids started crying as well. The weight of the shield pressed me to the ground, the crying children whom I swarmed to protect, Tiffany, her tears running freely. "Is this all you have, Finn? Is this all?" The staccato of bullets off the shield became a dull blur as a new row of headlights appeared in the drive. More fallen reinforcements. A tiny sliver of sun had crested the horizon, the light of the new day just moments away. I felt one last pocket of fight in my soul. We hold out, just to see the sunrise. One last sunrise. Above the cacophony of bullets, rotor blades, and crying children, a barbaric roar sounded from a short distance away. A blur of activity behind the upside-down Prius pulled my attention. As if choreographed to a dramatic symphony, 3 hunters were dancing back and forth, avoiding the wild swings of a tire iron by a 4th man, Steve. Behind him was a crumpled child lying motionless on the ground. A glint of fresh sunlight caught the knife of the hunter as he lunged over and over, the large security guard dodging and swinging with the agility of a much younger man. As one hunter would jab, the other would wait for the reaction and throw a following strike, each time cutting into Steve. He would twist and recoil from the fresh wound, but never retreat, the unknown boy between his wide stance his only concern. The 3rd hunter had a long broken pipe from the smashed chain-link fence. He was deliberately swinging at the boy, curled feebly on the ground. Over and over I watched him helplessly as Steve was slowly being cut to pieces, his arms and the side of his face covered in bright red blood. A dim flash of white light from Steve's chest appeared for a moment as the hunter thrust the broken pipe down on the defenseless boy. Gravel and dust flew up from where the pipe had missed the boy. With a look of confusion and frustration, the hunter smashed a second time directly down on the boy. Again, a pulse of light from Steve moved the boy out of the way as he continued to deflect and dodge the other 2 knife-wielding hunters. A 3rd time, the pipe came down, and this time it hit the dirt and stuck, the light emanating from Steve glowing steadily. With a grunt of frustration, the hunter pulled with all his might on his pipe, his only weapon. Steve grinned and brought the tire iron down heavily on his head. As he did so, the light radiating from him extinguished and the other hunter drove his knife deep into Steve's back. "Do something, Daniel! Help him!" I yelled. The frightened boy absorbed some of the courage he was witnessing, and he held his stump in their direction. A ball of dust and small gravel formed and rolled directly at the nearest hunter. The cloud consumed him as he was mid-swing and knocked him over. It was all the opening Steve needed as he dodged and spun away from the remaining hunter's attack, the knife handle still protruding from his back. Steve's spin concluded with the full force of the tire iron coming down on the hunter's skull with a loud crack. The body disappeared behind the Prius, but Steve followed with a second downward strike and a satisfying thud. He spun in place to face the other hunter, who now wore a look of fright instead of arrogance. The coward turned to run, but tripped. Daniel laughed. "I will need to ask him about that later." Steve wasted no time and brought the tire iron down with deadly force. A sound came from the building entrance, and he looked up in just enough time to catch a bullet in the gut. The force knocked him over. Walking casually from the building was Horatio, his demonic smile taking pleasure in the carnage he caused. Blood now poured from his stomach. Steve rolled to the side and staggered to his feet, dragging the lifeless body of the pummeled hunter up in front of him. Horatio opened fire, each bullet making a puff of red as it struck the hunter that Steve now used as a shield. With pure rage, Steve charged. The body shield absorbed each bullet as Horatio began backpedaling, his sneer now gone. Over the sound of the bullets raining down on me, I still heard the click of Horatio's gun on empty. Steve dropped the body of the now shredded hunter and charged, tire iron raised high. Horatio turned to run, but it was too late and caught a heavy blow to the back of the head. Steve stood over the body and roared one more time. The pudgy, inept rent-a-cop was gone, replaced by a bloody, courageous warrior. He looked up at me, nodded once, and collapsed. A fire welled within me, and I felt the power surge anew. Is courage one of the divine virtues? It is now. With my own barbaric roar, I pushed my shield outward in all directions and sent the encroaching circle of hunters flying. The chopper renewed its attack, seeing the bubble down. I diverted the stream of bullets in the general direction of the sprawled attackers. "Daniel, make me a compression wave, just like you did to blow out the door," I yelled. The boy stood beside me, the sun lighting his bright blonde hair like it glowed. He held both arms above his head for a few seconds and yelled, "Ready!" "Now!" I screamed as I simultaneously reformed the bubble shield around us. The compression wave rocked the ground and the chopper was tossed wildly higher in the air. "Crash, damn you," I said to myself as the helicopter pitched wildly side to side. Eventually it stabilized and hovered a short distance away. Damn. I was about to tell Daniel to prepare another volley when, from the field beneath the hovering chopper, a full tree launched in the air. The chopper swerved and went higher, but it was caught in a rotation and began to pitch side to side as it spun around. A tornado took shape and moved wildly around the flying death machine. Eventually, the pilot must have decided there was no winning a battle with the tornado and turned sharply and climbed away into the sky. I looked at the remaining hunters, now back on their feet, and a new emotion revealed itself on their once arrogant faces. Fear. From the east, walking confidently up the drive where I assumed hunter reinforcements had arrived, was the entire cell with Nella in the lead. On either side of her, with their hands on her shoulders, were Lexi and Marcus. Nella's hands were spread wide as she moved the tornado onto the edge of the parking lot and tossed an expensive car high into the air. Mac had run over and stood outside our bubble with his back to us, easily brushing aside the few bullets that still came our way. A short distance from Nella, coming up the drive, was Gladys. Her whoops and crackles echoed over the remaining gunfire. I couldn't tell if she was even using the power. She was just yelling and laughing as the hunters ran away. Zoo came in from the side, directly in front of 4 hunters who all raised their guns in our direction. With a swipe of his hand, all their guns flew out of their grasps and launched into the trees. The hunters were lost and confused, not knowing what to make of his momentary mid-battle pause. They did not have to wait long. Zoo's eyes slowly opened, and a smile spread across his face. His arms smoothly made a large circular sweeping motion, and the cars behind the hunters rose directly above them. Zoo held his arms apart, and the car appeared frozen. They all stepped back. His hands slowly compressed together, and the car began to crunch and buckle until it collapsed in a loud metallic crash, sending shards of glass everywhere. The loose ball of car shrapnel shuddered as Zoo, his fists now clenched together, brought the ball of twisted steel down with explosive force into the ground. The hunters were thrown back from the force of the impact, and dust flew into the air. Again he raised his hands, and the car flew back into the air. Like a sledgehammer, the ball slammed back into the ground, sending the hunters flying again. Bits of debris were breaking off and flying in all directions. The hunters couldn't run away fast enough, and they made their way over the broken-down fence and through the open field beyond the building. They were joined by another group fleeing the tornado. The distant crack of a high-caliber rifle still punctuated the air. There, across the field, was a black Lincoln Navigator with a small man lying over the hood, sniper rifle flashing. One by one, the fleeing hunters fell in the field. The last 2 decided to surrender, knowing there was nowhere to hide. Nico, apparently, did not accept surrender, as 2 more shots rang out, and the last of them fell. I scanned the carnage. No hunters were still moving. The bubble shield faded away, and silence, beautiful silence, filled the air. The sun had finally broken free of the horizon and covered us in light. It was over. I walked slowly to the body of the security guard, whom I knew nothing about. His lifeless eyes looked through me. Gently, I pulled his eyelids closed and said softly, "Thank you, Steve. Good luck in your probatus. Courage, my friend." "Do you think he knew he was using the power?" Daniel asked, looking down at the man lying in a pool of his own blood. I shrugged. "I don't know, but I will tell you one thing. The Creator would be a fool to miss out on adding a warrior like Steve to the ranks." Nella and the others were inspecting the children as Tiffany explained what she knew. I carried over the last child that Steve died defending and placed the weak boy in Zoo's arms. He looked up at the old Chinaman and asked, "Who are you?" Zoo smiled warmly, an uncommon sight to be sure, and replied, "I am Zoo, your new teacher. And what is your name?" The boy shook his head slowly. I don't remember. They call me 763. Daniel tugged at my sleeve. "They just give you a number. After a while, you can't remember what your name is supposed to be. Just tell them to choose." "Well, what do you say? Do you have a name in mind?" The boy looked puzzled for a second, and then pointed to the body of his protector. I smiled. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Steve." Mac had healed Tony, who was being a bit over-dramatic about his leg. I pulled him to his feet and hugged him. "Thanks, my friend. We did it." "Damn straight we did," he yelled in reply. Juliet was standing at the edge of the field looking out over the downed fence. I walked to her and considered the outcome if she had not come to my rescue. "I suppose I owe you a great deal of thanks," I said. To my surprise, she shushed me and held up a hand. "Something is still wrong. I can feel it." I looked out at the tall grass in the field, gently blowing in the morning sun. Nothing. Daniel had come over beside me, curious as to what was happening. He saw the tension in Juliet and investigated. Before he could open his mouth to ask a question, a blur of teeth and raging yellow eyes exploded over the tall grass just 10 feet from us. The crawl knocked over Daniel, who simultaneously unleashed a blood-curdling scream. Juliet grabbed my arm in panic as we watched the beast turn and prepare for another lunge at the boy, who had curled into a fetal position. I reached out to slow time as a black mountain of fur growled over my shoulder and leapt on top of the boy, straddling his body in protection. Shadrach let out a deep and powerful growl, the hair standing straight on his back, making him appear twice as big, as if that were possible. The kraal snarled and circled them. Juliet finally said, "This is quite enough," and pointed at the sand where the kraal danced back and forth. 1 second it was solid, the next it moved and sloshed aside as if it were fluid. The back legs of the beast were quickly buried, and Juliet clenched her fist, making the dirt solid again. The panicking creature snapped and snarled in all directions as it sensed its imminent demise. Shadrach leapt and in one motion sank his teeth deep into the spine of the creature. With a shake of his mighty head, the spine made an audible snap, and the kraal went lifeless. Shadrach didn't stop tearing at its hide till the head was completely removed from the body. No one dared stop him. Lexi and Marcus had just finished a sweep of the building and could not find any other kids or hunters. Gladys and Nella warmly greeted all the children, while Jack, still in tie and cufflinks, walked forward with a folder in hand. "Mike tells me you will need this information," Jack said, with his business confident square jaw and power grin. "It contains the locations of several other child test facilities like this one. At least they could be. You might want to double check before you level the place," he added, making a gesture to the carnage and destruction around us, and laughed. "There are 6 more. I will close them all. Thank you, Jack." The confused look on his face was about to ask more questions, so I walked away. This was my assignment, my journey. That was the deal. Tiffany was standing at the edge of the group, holding a little girl's hand and smiling. I had never seen her so real, so genuine, so beautiful. She had tears in her eyes. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Tiffany nodded and looked down at the small girl who was no more than 5. She was the same one that would only leave with Tiffany from the cell inside. She still looked totally unfazed by all the commotion. Tiffany grabbed my arm and said, "It's been a while since I've gotten to hold a child's hand. It's been even longer since a child wanted to hold mine." "I've got some bad news, Tiff." Her sweet look turned to a glare. I just plowed on. "I made a deal with, well, someone, and I need to do this 6 more times," I said, pointing to the overturned cars and dead hunters lying around us. "I'm not even going to ask you to join me." "Good, because the choice is already made." She cut me off definitively. "We are coming too." We? Who is we?" "Just the 2 of us," she said, smiling down at the tiny girl. A voice from behind announced, "And we're coming too." Daniel and Shadrach stood behind me, looking determined. Well, Daniel did. Shadrach looked like he was ready for a nap. I was about to argue about the dangers when Nella walked up. "I see you're about to move on," she said, extending her hand. I shook it and said nothing. "You did good, Finn. I need to thank you." "I think I should be the one thanking you, Nella. We were lower than a snake's ass in a wagon track when you came around." She chuckled. "I will miss you. You taught me an important lesson about the power. It needs to be used, shared. I think there's a verse about putting a light under a bushel or something. I think this is what they meant." "And what of the kid here? He seems intent on joining me." Nella just smiled, a tear forming in her eye. "I was never enough for Daniel. I always knew that." Her look shifted to the boy, who ran over and hugged her. She squeezed him tightly and looked up at me and said with all sincerity, "My promise remains. He dies, I'll restart you myself." She wasn't kidding. And then there were 4, well, 5, I guess. How do you not count the dog? After the requisite goodbyes, I asked Mac about Nico. The guy had vanished again. Mac chuckled slightly. "Yeah, the kid doesn't care for chit-chat. He's gone." "How many did he kill?" "Quite a few. He was shooting the entire time you were battling. There are lots of high-powered rifle deaths among the cars. We should have been here sooner." "Forget it. You came. We won." I hugged him and added, "Thank you for your instruction. It saved these kids today." "Ha! When exactly did I teach you to do a shield like that? That'll be the first thing I try when I get home. And now the teacher has become the student." The 5 of us walked toward the entry drive when Jack yelled out, "One more thing, Finn." He tossed me the keys to an old Chevy Suburban. "It's old, but runs like a beast. And don't forget to check in the glove box." We climbed in the blue 1999 Suburban with detailed paint and rust-colored accents. Or maybe that was just rust. In the glove box was a manila envelope with 4 stacks of cash. I nodded to the crowd and waved as we pulled down the drive. Tiffany, sitting next to me, her brown eyes glowed like I had never seen before. The makeup was gone, the purple streak in her hair covered in dirt and dust. I stopped at the end of the drive and leaned over to her, and she met me halfway. I looked in her eyes as our lips touched with the gentle electricity of real love. I felt time go slow and even stand still before. I guess I've even seen time go backwards. But this is the first occasion that I felt time itself dance. Our lips held each other in timeless presence. We separated, and our eyes met. Tiffany, finally, there you are.